One of the things that I've had to learn as an entrepreneur is that when there's problems and challenges that seem insurmountable, oftentimes those represent some of the best opportunities to create value. I'm not going to stop until I win my category. That's like my mentality right now. And I've inadvertently, along the way, built one of the fastest growing, if not the fastest growing B2B technology company in online sports betting. In 2022, there was more money spent by consumers on gambling on sports than there was in ride sharing, on cups of coffee, on streaming, more on betting on sports.
So how did you and Jake Paul get connected to become co-founders?
Yeah, so a few years ago,
Joey, welcome to the podcast, man. Happy to have you.
Yeah, good to be on, man.
Of course.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so right before this, we want to tell a quick story. So, Joey, you drink ketones on a, you said daily basis?
Yeah. Here, just quickly showing Ketone IQ, HVMN, 305 Ventures portfolio company.
Nice. So give me a brief background, because I just tried this, and for some reason I thought it was going to taste good, and I did a quick mini waterfall, and it was brutal, but I also didn't expect.
I did not give you ample heads up, so sorry about that. But no, I mean, the idea is you drink 35 milliliters of it and it puts your body and your brain into a state of ketosis without having to do a keto diet. And
Nice.
I use it as a supplement to coffee. I still drink coffee. I'm not in a position where I can fully replace caffeine right now, but it's a good way of just having your brain wired a little bit better. I take a sip of it before a meeting or, it's a way to just stay focused.
Yeah.
It's a supplement I highly recommend.
So you'll take a sip just throughout the day.
Yeah.
Will you finish an entire bottle of this daily, or maybe half?
No, it's 35 milliliters a serving, and typically I'll sip on 15 milliliters here and there, and it's just a good way before a meeting to feel a little bit more amped. So you see my ketones, my coffee, and my water. That's pretty much what I'm on, much of the day.
Nice. Well, I think I'm starting to feel something.
Yeah.
So we'll be good for this podcast.
So we're both going to be amped for this one. Yeah.
Cool, man. So I've known you for a year and a half now, and I want to kind of just jump into your initial start. Obviously, for those of you who don't know, Joey is the co-founder of Betr with Jake Paul, and you guys are doing great things there, and we're going to get to that, but I want to talk about kind of before that, which is kind of where you got started, right? And I think the big inflection point is the Thiel Fellow. So if you want to share some more in terms of what that program is and what you did to apply to get there, because I know it's very tough to get into that alone.
Yeah, it's a competitive process. I could share a little bit more about my background. So I was born and raised actually down here in South Florida in Broward County, which is just a little bit north. It's the county north of Miami-Dade County. And, as a kid, it was always my objective to I read a lot of Wikipedia pages, and I saw the most successful political leaders and business leaders. One of the common denominators that they had, and I think this is problematic, by the way, but what I realized while I was 14 or 15 was that a lot of them, a disproportionate amount of them, went to Ivy League universities. That's what I noticed. So in high school, I was very focused on getting into an Ivy League school. And my plan was, let me study something that I'm really good at and that I like so that I could get a 4.0 GPA, get a job at Goldman Sachs, get that six-figure income, and then sort of figure it out from there. Because I didn't come from money, and that seemed like the highest probability chance of success to start life with some modicum of financial freedom. So went to Columbia, studied history, focused on 19th century American history. Was doing really well, made Dean's List my freshman year, both semesters, and it was all going according to plan. And then right around when I started school, these companies called FanDuel and DraftKings started getting all this media attention and doing all this marketing. And I remember somebody in my family who I played fantasy baseball with as a kid, which was it was my favorite hobby growing up, playing fantasy sports, fantasy baseball, really specific 5x5 NL only rotisserie fantasy baseball, with we would draft minor league players and put them in our farm. We were really into this shit. And And so when these companies came around and started using them, I'm like, holy shit, FanDuel, DraftKings, daily fantasy sports, this is like the best idea ever. Because you basically took my favorite hobby and the favorite hobby of not just me, but tens of millions of Americans in this country. And they introduced instant gratification of the consumer experience by making it not, you didn't have to wait until the end of the season to know whether or not you won or lost your fantasy contest, but rather that day you'd enter a lineup based on that day's games and you would compete against other people and you'd win cash prizes. So not only did they introduce instant gratification, but they introduced like this real money gaming component to it. And I started using it and I became just super interested in the product experience and the business opportunity around it, because I knew that the same feeling that I was feeling was a feeling that probably tens of millions of Americans were starting to feel, which is that this is one of the most compelling consumer experiences, but the product experience felt way too, complicated, intimidating, transactional for, like the mass market casual sports fan. Like I remember thinking to myself, like, what normal sports fan? And FanDuel and DraftKings started sponsoring teams and doing all this advertising, like quite literally advertising like car insurance companies. And they're doing all this marketing, but their product experiences felt very much geared toward the hardcore like gaming customer and quantitatively savvy user. And I just felt like there was an opportunity to build a casual fan, simple, intuitive, easy to use daily fantasy sports platform, which is when I started my first business called DraftPot. And so I started working on that during my sophomore year at school. I became just obsessed with the business, and I remember like I went from like my Columbia 4.0 strategy, Dean's List strategy, to like I struggled making it to class. And I remember I like missed a final exam in one class because I like prioritized an investor meeting, and I just couldn't focus on school anymore because I was so obsessed with building this company, and I just kind of kept going with it. And, after my sophomore year, I took a gap year. So I think I'm technically on my like 8th or 9th gap year right now. Although I don't know if they'll take me back at this point, but, so I started working on the project, and then the people from the Teal Fellowship heard about what I was doing. Like Forbes did this piece on us, which like got some attention because we raised a couple $1 million as like, dropout college students, and we were going after a big market. So it was like an interesting enough narrative. So the Teal Fellowship people reached out to me, and they invited me to San Francisco to meet with them. And then I got a call from them like a week later, and the person who was running it at the time, he was like, do you want the Teal Fellowship? It's $100,000. And I'm like, great. How much equity do you want? And he's like, there's no equity. Like, we're just going to send you $12,500 a quarter. And we just want to check up on you once a month and monitor sort of, just track your progress. And we're here to help. We have a network. Peter Thiel obviously is one of the best venture capitalists, if not the best venture capitalist of our times. So with that comes like credibility and a network. So yeah, that's how I got so that's some of my background, and then how I got involved with the fellowship specifically. And then ultimately what ended up happening with the daily fantasy business, just to sort of close the loop on that, is, we launched the alpha product in January of 2015. We were improving the product experience throughout 2015. We were gaining like revenue traction. It was going well. We were way too aggressive with our customer acquisition budget around NFL 2015, because this business, as you can imagine, has like NFL is king in the United States. So there's a seasonality component where like Q3, Q4 things start really ramping up. So we were aggressive trying to acquire customers for during the football season, and it was going really well. We were going to raise growth financing in the form of Series A. And that's what DraftKings and FanDuel's playbook was at the time. It was like kind of grow, like pump top line metrics, and because it was like a market share grabbing game at the time. And our model was working to some extent. Like we really did sort of innovate within casual sports fans and launching an intuitive platform for mainstream consumers. And in mid-October of 2015, there was like an insider trading scandal where an employee of DraftKings used proprietary ownership data on like quarterbacks to win a bunch of money on FanDuel. He won like $200K. And this led to like an FBI investigation of the category. This led to a series of dozens of cease and desist letters led by the Attorney General of New York. So there was a lot of regulatory turmoil in the category, and that regulatory turmoil did not end until the Supreme Court repealed the federal ban on sports betting in May of 2018. So it lasted for like, 2.5 years, but it basically made the business just, I couldn't raise capital. It was very difficult. So it wasn't like a big financially successful outcome. We sold the assets to another smaller company in the space. But through that experience, I got the idea for starting SimpleBet, which was my company before Betr. And I actually used the Teal Fellowship money to start SimpleBet, and then ultimately spun out Betr from SimpleBet. And that's what I'm focused on today. So I'll stop rambling there. But that's some of the background. Yeah. And, effectively I've been just, ever since I sort of went down this rabbit hole of like trying to create the dominant consumer product experience in sports gaming in the United States, I've kind of been working on solving the exact same problem for like a decade. And it's been a journey that I feel like I'm still just getting started in.
That's amazing. So there's a lot to unpack there, and I'm gonna take it step by step. So the first thing I think that was very interesting that you mentioned is, and I think this is very relatable for anyone watching, is you were, quote unquote, almost destined or had a very linear path in mind growing up, right? In terms of you knew you wanted to get into an Ivy League, and you knew you wanted to eventually work at Goldman Sachs, and like that was
or like
your
the
path.
equivalent.
The
like
equivalent, right?
Yeah.
So what made you, obviously I know you were passionate about wanting to start the business, but what made you want to just change your thinking 180, where it's like school is not priority anymore, and then now it's this, right? Because that's it's a big change, and I think that's very tough for a lot of people to even like make some sort of mental change like that.
Yeah, so honestly, when I first started on DraftPod as like a project, I didn't start it thinking at the time that I was gonna like fully pivot to being like a tech entrepreneur or startup founder, whatever you want to call it. It was more that I thought I was right about a product vision, and just the more that I started spending time on it, the more obsessed I became with the problem. And but very initially it was like I almost thought like it's a thing that could help like my resume when I'm like applying to these jobs. Like that's kind of the initial thinking, which is always like it's not the right approach. Obviously, if you're trying to build something great, but like honestly, I didn't raise money for it right away. Like I just wanted to like build this thing and like see what would happen. And then, but the more and more I went down this path, I just became obsessed with building the business, acquiring customers, product development, everything that goes into it. So it was like a gradual process. And yeah, I'm just like super determined to ultimately, it started becoming even, it started becoming even less about money at a certain point. It's like, I felt like I was one of the first, if not the first people to like identify this as like a massive opportunity and to go after this problem. And now it's more for me about like winning. Like I'm not going to stop until I like win my category. That's like my mentality right now. And I've inadvertently like along the way, like started what's probably the fastest growing B2B technology company in the US online sports betting industry, which is what SimpleBet is, which was my company right before Betr. And I think that'll be a really good financial outcome. But my motivation is coming from winning an industry that I have become really passionate about and kind of obsessed with solving my particular problem. But it was a very like gradual process. It wasn't like woke up one day and I'm like, I'm going to be a tech founder. Like I never thought that, initially that would happen.
Got it. So going to today, right? Betr. You started Betr, I believe, a couple years ago.
We formally spun it out of SimpleBet, October of 2021. Really started getting after it in January 2022. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So it's been a year and a half, almost exactly to right now. Yeah.
Nice. So how did you and Jake Paul get connected to become co-founders?
Yeah. So a few years ago, I went to like a dinner, like one of these dinners that was organized for like people in technology and venture. And I get there super late, and I end up sitting next to this guy, Jeffrey Wu, who actually is the founder of the Ketone Company. And he recently started a VC fund with Jake Paul. And I didn't know any of this at the time. I was just sitting next to him and, just started talking about what I was working on. And at the time I was very much focused on Simplebet. And, to give you a little bit of the background on that to make the story make sense, I started Simplebet, and the reason why it's called Simplebet is because my vision was not too dissimilar from what I was trying to solve at DraftPot, which was to simplify the sports betting user experience. I don't know, have you bet on sports before, or are you familiar with what these products look like or not?
Not really.
Okay,
Not really.
so when you go to a sports book, and this was my first product experience with it. So you go to a sports book, and the simplest way to describe it is it kind of feels like an uninterpretable spreadsheet. So spreadsheet, because it's a bunch of like, the UI is a bunch of like tables, lists, grids, but the uninterpretability comes from the fact that the product experience, like the main ones are money lines, point spreads, and over-unders. A money line on like the Heat to beat the Celtics could be like -175, for example, which means you have to bet 175 to win 100. Those are kind of the units that you use, or +5.5 point spread, or 49.5 O/U, which means over under. And you're betting on like, will the total amount of points in a game be like over 49.5 or under 49.5? So the fact that I even had to explain that to you is problematic, right? Like, I thought it was highly problematic that the first time I opened up one of these gambling apps, I didn't know how to use it. And I had to spend like 10 minutes on Google, like figuring out what a money line, a point spread, and over under was. So, and I was like, I'm not the smartest. I try not to be the smartest guy in any room I go into, but I was an Ivy League educated former daily fantasy sports operator. If anybody should have understood how to use a sports book upon first using it, it would have been me, and I couldn't use it. So I started Simplebet to effectively build almost like the Robin Hood to the gambling industry's E-Trade, Fidelity, Charles Schwab. Like, E-Trade built a really good, robust user experience for like the power day trader, but I felt like Robin Hood, through a combination of, as we know, like business model innovation with the zero commission trading, but also that simple, intuitive UI UX, they really built the first product that like anybody could just buy and sell stocks, right? Like from a user experience standpoint. And ultimately what happened was they created a lot of incremental TAM. There was a lot of people who weren't buying and selling stocks who now were, because there was like this accessible consumer experience that they could go to. So my original idea for Simplebet was to build like this direct-to-consumer Robin Hood of gambling. And a month after, so I started working on it as a project actually in Eastern Europe, which I could talk a little bit about that experience for about a year and a half because it wasn't legal in the United States. As I was there, I realized it was way better to come back to the US. Even if the US wasn't legal yet for sports betting, it would be better to like be a US-based venture-backed business like I did last time, because venture capital works a lot better here. So came back to the US, we incorporated Simplebet Inc. April 2018. 6 weeks later, the Supreme Court repealed the federal ban on sports betting, and all of a sudden it started becoming legal here. And as a result of that, we decided to focus exclusively on U.S. sports, still direct to consumer, building these user experiences. And some of the ideas we had for U.S. sports were around enabling people to bet on like what's going to happen in the next pitcher at bat of a baseball game, next player drive of a football game, like the moments within U.S. sporting events. And that's when we went to the B2B technology companies and realized that a lot of the technical infrastructure to enable moment-to-moment betting on U.S. sports and other forms of sports betting that would be really good for U.S. fans, it didn't exist, which made sense because the global marketplace the U.S. wasn't a part of it. And globally, the sport that drove most consumption was soccer. And if you think of how a soccer match works, it's a very fluid game without a lot of scoring, without really any moments to bet on. And U.S. sports are like the opposite. It's very stop and start, moment to moment, a lot of scoring, statistics, speculation over superstar players and what they'll do next. So with Simplebet, we had to start building a lot of machine learning and automation infrastructure to enable micro betting on U.S. sports and other forms of sports betting on that were bespoke to U.S. sports to exist. We had to do that out of necessity. And along the way, we realized that that was a wholly separate business of hiring like data engineers, data scientists, machine learning engineers, these super specialized software engineers. And so we inadvertently built like this it was a separate business, and we started licensing the technology to other operators, and we inadvertently built one of the fastest growing, if not the fastest growing B2B technology company in online sports betting. The business, currently powers DraftKings, Caesars, Bet365, Hard Rock, Betway. I mean, it's becoming increasingly ubiquitous across the US online sports betting marketplace. And, if you go on DraftKings right now and you bet on like, will the next possession in the Nuggets Heat game be like a 2-pointer or a 3-pointer or free throws? Like, that's powered by SimpleBet, and SimpleBet's getting like a portion of the revenue. So that's the background on SimpleBet. And I bring that up because when I was sitting next to Jeff Fu at that dinner, I was working on that, but it was around the time where I became very frustrated because while we built a really nice business as a B2B technology company, we had no purview into solving the initial problem that I wanted to solve, which is that consumer experience that is just so uninterpretable and not engaging to a casual sports fan. And I couldn't solve it at SimpleBet anymore, because if we launched our own D2C brand or app or whatever, our B2B customers like DraftKings would have just told us to fuck off. Like, you're competing against us now. So I had to spin out a new entity. That was ultimately the sort of elegant solution we came up with. And I was in the process of thinking through how to do that. And that was also right around the time that Jeff and Jake were thinking about maybe doing some more company incubation instead of just traditional venture investing. And I think they were actually like recently looking at sports betting as an opportunity, because I'm sure you're familiar with like Barstool Sports and Dave Portnoy, and they had a lot of success partnering with Penn and going after the sports betting opportunity, and ultimately not paying a lot of money for customers because they have this media audience and brand affinity. So Jake was already thinking about the category a little bit, and they were also thinking about doing more company incubation. And I mean, up until that point that, I was in the journey for like 6-7 years and trying to solve this problem. And I built this B2B technology company that built a lot of the requisite technical infrastructure I needed to go ahead and properly execute it, prosecute the problem that I wanted to solve. And we just started talking about working together on this. And ultimately, after a few months of discussing it, and Jake actually first invested in SimpleBet, and then we spun out the entity and created ultimately what Betr became. Nice.
So now that you've had experience on both building a B2B company as well as a B2C company in this VC tech space, what would you say are the pros and cons to both?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I would say when you're building a B2B business, you have a fewer amount of operator clients that, like, when we're building a consumer business, we're building something for everybody, right? Like, there's, sports betting's legal in about 30 states right now. So there's about 90 million gambling age sports fans that are technically in our total addressable market. When, states like California, Texas, Florida go live and most of the country opens up, there'll be probably around 200 million gambling age sports fans that will be our total addressable market. When you're building a B2B business, the customers that mattered in our case were like FanDuel, DraftKings, BetMGM, Caesars, and those four account for like 80 to 90% of the entire market. Exactly. So it's a very different mentality. And, one of the counterintuitive things that I sort of identified and struggled with some others who I've been doing business with is that a lot of people would say B2B is way safer and less risky than B2C, because B2C has all these incremental expenses. You have to acquire customers. In my industry, you have to get market access and licensing. And these are like not trivial expenses in real money gambling in the United States. So a lot of people were like, it's way too risky to do direct to consumer. But the counterintuitive point to that is it's arguably even more risky to be B2B because there's only a handful of executives at a handful of companies that are sort of controlling your destiny. And I didn't love that. I felt like I've been right all along about my product vision, and I want consumers and the marketplace, like the broader marketplace, to ultimately be like the arbiter of truth here, right? And with B2B, I actually counterintuitively felt like it was even riskier than B2C. However, Simple Bet's done a phenomenal job of de-risking its path to success by getting DraftKings and Caesars and Hard Rock and Bet365, which is the leading global operator, and some of the other clients that they've gotten. I think Betr's done a really good job of de-risking against some of the problems or some of the challenges that I identified to you, because we're building a bona fide media business that is building a real audience and a real brand, such that we're not paying a material amount of money for customers, and customer acquisition is the primary expense. And we're demonstrating in real time that we're capable of validating this low to no CAC thesis. FanDuel and DraftKings and the incumbents, they spend anywhere from high hundreds to low thousands per real money gaming customer. We're not paying money for customers. And we even started experimenting with paid UA, like spending a little bit on Twitter ads, for example. And we're noticing that even on paid UA, our customer acquisition cost is a lot lower. Like it's a sub $70 CAC right now, because we have this halo effect around our brand. If you're on Twitter and you see a Betr ad, you're like, oh, I'm less familiar with Betr. I've seen their content around. So you're more inclined to convert. So we've de-risked the customer acquisition narrative. Or the customer acquisition issue. We've market access. One of the first things I did when starting Betr was brought in like the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians as a partner in the business to mitigate that upfront market access expense, because they own casinos in the Southeast in the United States. And by giving them equity instead of having to pay tens of millions of dollars for licenses or market access to get licenses, it de-risks that expense. So my point is, there's ways. One of the things that I've had to learn as an entrepreneur is that when there's problems and challenges that seem insurmountable, oftentimes those represent some of the best opportunities to create value.
Yep.
So I think both businesses have done a good job of that.
Gotcha. So you wouldn't say there's any one specific thing that you would lean towards of building. There's just pros and cons.
I love consumer. I personally, for everybody it's different. Like it depends on what your motivations are, right? Like if you're motivated by, I don't know, you can make a ton of money in both categories. I think consumer businesses inherently have higher financial upside in most cases. There's some industries where like picks and shovels businesses are just the best financial outcomes, but consumer, I prefer the marketplace to be the arbiter of truth here. Like I want to win amongst the broad marketplace and consumers and create incremental TAM. In a marketplace where I think there's plenty of room for incremental TAM. One interesting stat about my industry that I'll share is, and people don't realize this, and again, sports betting is only legal in 30 states right now, and the big states, California, Texas, and Florida, have not legalized it yet. So despite all of that, in 2022, there was more money spent by consumers on gambling on sports than there was in ride sharing, on cups of coffee, on streaming, more on betting on sports. And we're just like in the top of the second of this industry. So my point is, you have this massive industry and you have these incumbents, FanDuel and DraftKings, they're worth $20 and $10 billion respectively, but they're tapping out at about 3 million monthly active users, while they're already in front of 90 million gambling age sports fans, and they'll be in front of 200 million gambling age sports fans at market maturity. And I don't think they have a brand awareness problem. As I alluded to earlier, back in the day, they were advertising like car insurance companies, and today they're still advertising like car insurance companies, except they're probably not as funny with their content. But they don't have a brand awareness problem. They have a product problem. So if I'm right, and I think I am, and there's been some validation along the way to prove that I'm right, but I think I'm really right about the big problem in this category, which is what will unlock that 3 million MAUs to that 90 to 200. And I'm not saying all of them will or should be gambling on sports, but there's 25 to 50 million MAUs in this TAM that I think are doable. So my point is, with consumer, there's like a huge opportunity to do that. Whereas with your B2B, you're beholden to the existing guys that are operating in that 3 million MAUs to drive to get that incremental TAM themselves. And I just don't like that lack of control. Like, I think I'm a good entrepreneur and an operator, and I think I'm really right about the product vision. So I should therefore be the one to execute against that vision and see it through fully with as much control as I can.
Got it. So walk me through your day in the life right now as a CEO of a tech company. Like, what is
my daily routine?
Yeah, what's your daily routine? What does it look like? 5 a.m. cold plunge?
No, nothing like that. We spoke a little bit about this before. Yep. I'm like pretty non-negotiable about my sleep. I think that's the most important thing. So I try to get 8 to 10 hours a night. There's some days where it's just not possible. Like, I have so much going on the next day, and it's like I can't move it. But I'm getting to a point where it's like it's becoming increasingly more non-negotiable. So sleep 8 to 10 hours a night. And the reason why I do this, and I was telling you earlier, it's a lot of it it's math, right? Like, are you really gonna? I get paid for like my brain power. That's like what like I need my brain at 100% capacity to ultimately make the best decisions and, collaborate with my team to execute against this business. So why would I go from like 100% brain power to potentially like 75% brain power to like pack in 1 or 2 extra meetings? Like, it just doesn't make sense when you're generally awake for like, 16 hours a day. Yeah. Right. So 8 to 10 hours of sleep. I'll wake up in the morning. I'll do, an hour walk in the sun to like get moving and get some sunlight, and then I'll take a shower and go to the office. And we have a warehouse here in Miami, a 20,000 square feet space where half of it is for content creation, half of it's for business operations. And I'm just fucking grinding in the warehouse, man. Pretty much almost every hour that I'm awake, unless I have like a meeting or I like come here and do your podcast and do things like that. But and it's totally I love what I do, man. Like I like, yeah. I mean, I know this is a public podcast and whatever, but I'd kind of be doing this shit for free, right? So it's not a problem that I'm kind of in there for like 10 to 12 hours a day, and that's a day, man, right? And like, people sometimes are like, how are you doing? Whatever, like making small talk, and like the main response I give, and this sounds like super fucking lame, but it's the truth, is like, you want to know how I'm doing? Read my last shareholder update. Like, it's all in there, for better or for worse.
CC you in this company
like that,
meeting.
Like, that's how I'm doing, man. Yeah. Like, I'm just very, because as you probably got from sort of the background, and I've been working on the same problem for my entire adult life, like technically since I was a teenager. And it's and I'm finally at a place right now where I feel like we're gonna, like, we have the requisite ingredients in place to win, and most importantly, not just for me and my company and winning ourselves, but really to give sports fans in this country like the first mainstream product experience that really enhances their consumption of sports. And we live in a world of like sports politics and religion, and of the three, I think sports is the one that like is more universally like, it's less polar. I mean, it's polarizing, but in like a more harmless way, right? Like, Red Sox fans will scream at Yankees fans and vice versa, but it's like it's like arguably the predominant form of entertainment in the world. And we have an opportunity to be the biggest company in the space. So I think this could be a really big company that provides a lot of like delight and entertainment value to hundreds of millions of people globally over the long run. So it's a big, I take the potential of doing that very seriously. And, we have an incredible team, most of whom have moved to Miami, and it's just it's a great place to work and to build this thing.
Why'd you choose Miami? to live, to work from? What are the pros?
There's a lot of pros, man. As I mentioned, I'm from South Florida. And when I was growing up down here, I never thought that I could come back and be like work here. Like it was like this place wasn't a place known for doing like business or tech I mean business from the standpoint of like tourism and hospitality and things like that, but never
but
like
not Silicon Valley.
Yeah, like not Silicon Valley. I never thought that. I remember, so I mentioned that I was doing Draft Pod, and I was in New York because I was like there for Columbia, and dropped out and stayed there, and I was in Eastern Europe for a little bit doing a project that ultimately became SimpleBet. And I remember when I came back to the U.S. and we formed the company in New York, I actually wanted to form it in Miami potentially. I couldn't do it because my two co-founders were like early to mid 50s at the time with like families and homes there, and I was like 22 with like no real excuse to be anywhere. So we did it in New York, but I had like a little bit of dough to like get a very small place on the side in Miami, mostly because I wanted to like spend a little bit more time with my family. Like I was doing this entrepreneurial thing, like you know how it is. Like sometimes you burn out a little bit. I like wanted a little place to like see my family, and I just noticed that every time I would come back down to Miami, I was in a way better mood. Like, and there's probably a few reasons, right? Like the sunlight, the weather. I also feel like Miami has like a lot more openness towards intellectual diversity, if that makes sense. Like I have some, not to be, I don't like publicly talking about politics, but like I have a few conservative viewing political views, and I would feel like sometimes timid to like say what I really thought in New York or San Francisco, because people will like, you'll get ostracized. Whereas in Miami, it's like you could have a conversation, and like it's more middle of the road, 50-50. So there were a lot of reasons that I just was in a better mood in Miami, and I always told myself after SimpleBet I would want to start my next company here. And I remember telling Zaid, my partner on 305 Ventures.
Shout out Zaid.
Shout out Zaid. So I met him for the first time in Miami. It was New Year's Eve. I was holding a little thing at my place with some of the other Teal fellows. He was one of them. That I met him through that. And we were doing, it was like end of 2017, beginning of 2018. And I remember telling him and some other people there, and this is after spending a little bit more time in Miami, I said Miami was going to be a tech hub one day. I don't know when, but like this place is awesome. Like the quality of life, the cost of living relative to New York and SF. I mean, that's you own real estate here, so that's like that it's changed really quickly, but it's still relatively cheaper, I think, than SF, LA, and New York.
Yep.
And then of course there's the financial situation where you have no state income tax, which is a big deal. So before Keith Raboy, Delian, Mayor Suarez, whatever, before they were tweeting, and by the way, I think it's amazing how they got so much enthusiasm about, people being in Miami. But I've been saying for a while, I thought this place would be a tech hub, and there isn't like an iconic consumer business that's come out of Miami. I think the closest thing to it is Chewy in Broward County. They're like the pet brand that has done really well. So that's it, right? So I kind of obsessed with building like a big consumer company out of Miami, and I also don't believe in remote work. So I've had to, go through the challenge or the opportunity of relocating people to Miami, and for whatever it's worth, it seems like everybody who's moved here loves it, and Miami's not it's not particularly the hardest place to convince somebody to move. So there are a lot of reasons, man, and it's worked out really well for us.
I remember I was living in LA in 2020, 2021, and this is during all of the lockdowns. LA got really bad, and one of my friends was like, "Hey, you should come to Miami for a weekend, February of 2021." Okay. And I was like, why not? Like, there's nothing to do in LA anyways.
Well, I was going to say February 21 is like one of the there was nowhere else open.
Correct.
in the US. Yeah.
And so I had just gotten COVID
Yeah.
from literally not leaving my house December of 2020. So I was like, okay, I'm good. I'm immune. So I go to Miami, February of 2021. And I remember when I stepped foot here, I was absolutely shocked. Like right when I landed at the airport, a beautiful woman walking around everywhere in the airport.
Yeah.
It's sunny, it's bright. People are walking around with no mask. And I was like, what is this world? It felt like I was in a new world because from not going out for an entire year. And that was when my eyes opened about Miami. And it's like what you said, I saw great weather, they had great food. And that's when I really saw the potential in Miami. And I went for 1 week and I ended up staying for 4 months. And that's kind of how I got stuck in Miami.
And now what's your perspective now? You're planting. I mean, you bought this place, right? So you think you're going to be here long term?
Yeah, definitely minimum at least the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
I mean, obviously as I eventually start a family and stuff, maybe I'll go more north to Palm Beach or Coconut Grove. But 27, definitely want to stay in Miami more. But I think there's just so much potential, right? Because I'm sure you know this, being in business as well, you want to go where something is you want to go with the future trends, right? That's how you do something big. And there's been a huge exodus year over year from LA, New York, SF, and they're moving to places like Texas. A lot of people are moving to Miami and just South Florida in general.
Yeah.
So if we believe that that's the hypothesis, eventually everyone's going to come here. So you want a head start. If you do, before home prices go crazy, before meeting the right people and stuff, you want to be early on these trends. And so I think right now is the best time to be in Miami.
Yeah, no, it's kind of like big fish in a pond that's like in the process of becoming really fucking big, but not quite there yet, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I get that.
So, yeah, Miami is the spot. So I know you said earlier you don't believe in remote work.
Yeah.
Would love to.
I mean, it could work in some cases, and I should be careful how I articulate this because we actually just bought a company in Canada that's working remotely right now. So technically half the company is now working remotely as a result of that acquisition, and it's been going really well actually. So I think there's certain functions that could be remote, like certain engineering functions. I think also on the revenue and sales side, some of the best work is a lot of, if not most of the best work is done on the road selling. Like for example, Betr is a bona fide gaming business and a media business. So on the media side, we the number one objective for Betr Media is audience growth to inform the number two objective, which is converting that audience over to real money gaming customers so that we have low to no CAC, but to truly enable low to no CAC, because the counterpoint to that would be, well, you're investing millions of dollars in this media company. That's not low to no CAC. But what if you monetize the media company directly? So priority number 3 is generating revenue off the media company. And,
Smart.
I didn't bring my Celsius energy drink can, but Celsius is a sponsor, for example, and
Betr Media.
A Betr Media.
Nice.
Yeah. So, so my point is like, now we're thinking more seriously about being methodical around our media sales, partnerships and revenue approach. So there's probably gonna be a world where there's gonna be a few people involved, like selling, being on the road, meeting with brands or whatever. So my point is there's some cases where remote it makes sense or is a requirement. We also have an engineering office in Cluj, Romania, where we have a dozen engineers there, and but so we have like 28 engineers in Canada, a dozen engineers in Cluj, so that's 40, but 40 people in Miami. So I guess to correct myself, I don't want to say I don't want to be like
there's pros and cons.
There's pros and cons.
Yeah.
I don't want to make a sweeping generalization that I don't believe in remote work or it doesn't work. However,
Elon Musk does though.
when just to be clear, I think the real answer is when you can if all else is perfect and or equal or whatever, you want people to work on site. And because a lot of the value that the better way to articulate this is that I view what we're doing as not to make our shit sound more important than it is, but this is very much like soldiers in an army, hand-to-hand combat type shit. particularly for what we're doing, we're embarking upon a series of David versus Goliath matchups everywhere we go. Like, one of the things that you may ask about and probably saw is like Betr raised a $50 million Series A, for example. And a lot of people were like, wow, that's a big Series A. That's a lot of money. You guys are going to crush it. You're going to be successful. You're really good at raising money, blah, 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 all that shit. But that's an incorrect perspective. The correct perspective is, and I'll give you context before I give you the perspective, but just in January, just in Ohio, just off promotional bonuses, not even paid UA, just promotional bonuses, FanDuel and DraftKings, there are 14 other companies in the market, but FanDuel and DraftKings combined for over $150 million in promo bonuses just that month, just in Ohio, which is more than 3 times my entire equity financing for my entire company. And I'm building 2 companies in one. I'm building a gaming business and a media business. So my point is, like, on the capital raising that I brought up, it's like the correct response is 50. The question is, should be, is 50 million enough to do what you're doing? That's the first question. But relatedly, I give you that perspective because it's truly a series of David versus Goliath matchups that we're embarking upon. And for us to win, we need to build something truly differentiated and really achieve greatness on both the product side and the distribution side. And I'm just skeptical, like, the people doing that can do that over Zoom and Slack.
Yeah.
And that's why we're all here together, or almost all of us are here together doing this thing. And, but there's certain realities where, the 28 engineers that we brought in from Canada and the 12 engineers that we have in our Romanian office, they're incredible people with incredible skill sets and have done a really great job for the business so far. And so now investing in making that remote structure with them as seamless as possible and embedding them in the company culture to the greatest extent we can. As the CEO, continue to, earn the trust and respect of these individuals is increasingly becoming a priority for me. But ideally, you're all together, working together if you're really trying to build something great together.
Yep. What advice would you have for a first-time founder just starting out, and especially in today's day and age?
I've recently reflected on some of my entrepreneurial journey, because I'm like, and I was talking to you a little bit more about this. I'm doing more of these public interviews and podcasts and shit like that, because it's like good for the business. And but it's also forced me to reflect on questions like this, because I've never really I've been so in the weeds on my shit. I've never thought about that. But I sort of came to there's 3 main things that are key values that I would recommend to a first time entrepreneur, that are true to first or second or third or fifth time founders or whatever. So the first thing, and this is in order from least important to most important. So first thing is, you got to be smart enough to identify opportunities before they become obvious to others. As an entrepreneur, it's hard to create value if you're just doing something else that somebody else is doing, but a little bit better. A slightly better mousetrap is not where you create and by the way, as a founder, you don't necessarily have to raise VC money, but if you're going after that venture opportunity where you provide outsized returns, you gotta think about if the problem you're solving, and if you're right, will that outcome be, is there something about you and your personal experiences that makes you have conviction that holy shit, this is going to be a really big opportunity, but it's not obvious to others yet, and there's actually reasons why it's not obvious to others. And that's very much been my story, right? I remember I was laughed out of rooms when I started pivoting Simple Bet from this Robin Hood of gambling vision to B2B technology company to enable micro betting. I was laughed out of rooms because people were like, well, micro betting accounts for less than 1% of the total betting volume globally. Like, why you're going to burn a shit ton of investor money by like hiring all these like engineers to build infrastructure to enable micro betting when it's such a small part of the marketplace? It was obvious to me that micro betting was going to be a big deal in the United States because I was a young U.S. sports fan who intuitively understood that the cadence and composition of U.S. sports was very different than soccer, right? Like moment to moment, a lot of scoring. It just micro betting lent itself very well to U.S. sports, whereas soccer didn't. So it was kind of obvious to me, but to most people who were just looking at data at the time, it wasn't obvious to them. So that was an example, and we ended up, and now micro betting, 2 or 3 years after broader commercialization of it, it went from sub 1% in the US. Now it's 30% of in-play betting. So wow. We were very right about that. And we're in the top of the first inning for micro betting. I think it's going to be a lot higher than 30% of in-play over time. So that's point one. Point two, which is the thing that I think most people struggle with, is it's really important, I think, to be humble enough to admit to and learn from mistakes. Like a lot of first-time founders, and I made this mistake too when I was a first-time founder, you kind of have, going through school, it embeds this fear of failure, right? You got to get 90% more right on everything you're doing to get an A- or an A. So you have this fear of failure, and I think the academic institutions don't help with this. So what happens is when you're trying to build a new product or service or technology, you have such imperfect information and there's a lot of uncertainty, and you're inevitably going to go down paths that are mistakes. But a lot of times the ego of the first time founder is such that it takes them longer to admit to and ultimately learn from these mistakes because they don't want to admit that they were wrong. And if I could go back and tell my first time founder self, there was hills that I was willing to die on that I shouldn't have been my perspective. I should have been more agile and willing to admit to mistakes. And then the third thing I would say to a first-time founder is the most important thing is just being determined enough to never give up. When you're an entrepreneur, and I'm sure this resonates really well with you too, there's hundreds or even thousands of little things or seemingly insurmountable things that will just come your way and be challenges that you didn't even anticipate going into this. You didn't even know this shit existed. And if you're not sufficiently determined, one of those things or a series of those things is going to have you give up. But my mentality on this is I'm never going to give up. I'm not going to stop until I win. And I think that level of determination in startups where inherently the odds are definitely stacked up against you, you need a sufficient level of determination to be successful, I think.
Nice. 100%. I feel like that's all those things are spot on, especially if you want to push through the chasm where most people drop off. So, yeah. What are your thoughts?
I mean, sorry to cut you off, but there were literally 5-10 moments I could probably identify where it Simple Bet should have died, for example. Yeah. And the founding team just wouldn't let it happen. Yep. And it now is a 9-figure valuation business.
Yeah. It's funny you brought that up because I think the same way. I can probably count 5 no-brainer times where
it should have just been
my
dead.
company should have just been dead.
Yeah.
Where everything was going wrong, people were leaving because team morale was so low, the company was losing money, and then you power through and you figure it out. So
yeah.
What are your thoughts on the importance of going to college still nowadays?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know, man. I think it's not for everybody. I mean, some of the most successful people obviously didn't go to college or finish college. Honestly, when I was out there raising money for Draft Pod, which ultimately started my entire entrepreneurial journey, I would say one of the biggest sources of value that I got from my college experience was the fact that, I had a good enough SAT scores and GPA to get into Columbia. So people just assumed I was smart because I went to Columbia, right? So it's like the credibility that the institutions prescribe to you is valuable, but oftentimes the actual content that comes as a result of the education is not particularly what you need to be successful. If I would say the three things: smart, humble, determination, like those are the muscles you should, put yourself in the arena in and start flexing to get better at. But so it's not for everyone. I mean, but then there's benefits too, right? Like I was a history major, and actually like I could sit here and talk shit about like how useless that shit is, but actually I read a lot and I wrote a lot. And history is a big fucking story, man, just everything that's happened in the past, and then articulating, those different stories and gaining insights from those stories. And, like the cliche Steve Jobs quote is like, the most powerful man in the world is the storyteller, right? So reading, writing, articulating, these are really important things to be a leader in business. So if anything, if you go to college, like consider being a history major or an English major, or look into some of the liberal arts disciplines. But I got some benefits from college, but I don't think it's for everybody. And I think it's a lot more expensive than it should be. I think they really got to get the cost under control so that it's not prohibitively expensive for people who want to go to college.
Yep. Nice, man. Well, I think we covered quite a ton, so I appreciate you coming on today's podcast, sharing your story. I'm excited to see what you do with Betr and Jake. So and I'll stop by the warehouse one of these days, man.
Yeah, no, would love to have you, man. Thanks for having me on, and good luck with the podcast.